and welcome to Web Vibes Only. Today we're going to talk about Analog, which is a meta framework for Angular. Like always, I'm Ankita, and with me we have Keller Johnson. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. As always, excited to get into the topic of discussion today. Analog has been something that was sorely needed in the Angular community for a while. I'm happy to see it and happy to talk about it.
Yeah, likewise. I think it's another one of those spiteful driven. What's the word?
Yeah, spike-driven development.
Yeah, driven development that gave us this framework as Angular had been lacking a meta framework for quite a while. And it's relatively new compared to all the other meta frameworks that all the other frameworks have. And we recently got version 2 released as of last November or December of last year, 2025. And it has a smaller community, not as many contributors, but the contributors are hardcore, very serious about this. They're gung-ho about releasing new features and improving it. And they spend a lot of thought and lot of love and hard work goes into building any meta framework, but especially Analog. And I think we can say that because we know the core team, or at least one of the members behind this. And so we obviously are biased towards this. And also as Angular developers, we're also biased towards the meta framework that is built on top of Angular. We're excited to talk through all the features that it has because it has plenty.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's start with routing first because it has file system based routing, which Angular doesn't have. Boy, oh boy, do I wish it did.
Yeah, so this is one of those things where, like, for most applications, file-based routing is actually much easier than config-based routing. You just put the file in the right place, and that's the path. If you're debugging something or looking at something, and you're on the page, you see the problem, you know exactly where that's going to live in the code. I mean, you don't have to worry about. I've worked in a lot of Angular projects where, like, the path you saw is actually pointed at something that was not named the same. It was a little bit challenging to track down. You had to look at the element in the dev tools, and then you actually had to, like, go search the entire project for that, like, selector. So that is, that's not super difficult, but it's more difficult than it needs to be. For most things, file-based routing is simpler. But config-based routing, I have to admit, is more powerful and is probably better for more complex scenarios, which is why it's important that all of those types of complex scenarios you can still handle in analog, because analog doesn't change the way routing works. It simply builds the same old Angular router from your file structure.
Right, yeah, it's built on top of Angular, so it just supports this additional way of routing. And you can still use it within that system. You can use all the goodies that Angular router has, like using route component input bindings instead of having to inject and identify all the query parameters. You can just use inputs to get those from the routes. It's super powerful. And of course, there's a place for meta frameworks or apps, SSR apps for which you typically use meta frameworks like these. So for something that you need like a simplistic app, it's a great option.
Yeah, especially great for content-driven sites like, e-commerce and that sort of thing. And that's because the router can handle markdown. You just throw markdown in there and it can handle it for you. You don't have to bring in any extra packages, anything. It has markdown. So making content-driven sites like you typically would with e-commerce or even documentation sites, this is something that is really powerful and supports markdown out of the box. The other thing that I wanted to mention with routing is that Analog uses the Nitro server toolkit for routing. And that's how it gets for this file-based routing to work. If you are familiar with Nuxt and the Vue ecosystem, Nuxt is also built on top of Nitro server toolkit. So the routing for Analog is very, very, very similar to Nuxt.
Says on the introduction, we kind of skipped over it, but all the other meta frameworks derives inspiration from it and provides a similar experience to build on top of Angular. And it's exciting because the server deployment is powered by Nitro, which makes it so much more faster, and It's really a noticeable difference. And support for markdown and just having a solid SSR solution wasn't a thing in Angular, and Analog kind of fills that gap for us. And it also supports Angular components with Astro. It's super cool what all we're able to achieve just by using Analog.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then we also have API routes, which can be used to serve data to the application. So this is where your SSR configuration comes into play.
Yeah. So this is great. This is where server, like actually requesting data on the server, if you have like a fully static site, you can make this happen at build time. If you have a server rendered app, then you can make this happen at request time, right? And you can do things about like controlling cache values and stuff like that to make this more performant, so that it's not eating up server compute every time someone makes a request, that sort of thing. You can also use this for just API. This isn't just for requesting data on the server and server rendering apps. You can stand up an API endpoint and you can actually make requests to that API endpoint from the client. And that you might see if you're looking through the documentation that they're importing TypeScript types and functions from 3. 3 is a universal, tiny, fast node server, essentially. It's very commonly used with Nitro Server Toolkit. That is the default used with Nitro Service or Nitro Server Toolkit. So H3 is extremely fast and it's really simple. It provides a really good primitive for this API route kind of base API layer kind of thing.
Yeah, it's super easy to hook up all these things and just error handling and setting cookies, like everything has been thought of and handled and been taken care of. And you can, for static sites that again don't have a whole lot of data that's dynamic or changes or needs a whole lot of updates, you can use Open Graph image generation and it'll just display previews based on the image that you hook up there. And it's all these sorts of things that you don't have to really think much about, and you just plug in and it works wonderfully.
Yeah, I really like that they call out WebSockets here too.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that too. They do call out that the support in Nitro is experimental, and they have a plugin that you can use to enable it. So it's a risk that if you want to use this in a production app, that you are willing to take when you do this. But I think it's cool to have that option because you typically don't see something like this for a meta framework.
Yeah, absolutely. This is if you want to get WebSockets to work in a lot of meta frameworks out there, it's not trivial to do. So
Yeah.
having documentation specifically around this, covering this, is pretty cool to see that right there on the documentation site.
Yeah, and just the example of how you would do it. That's pretty awesome. We're just going to go through all the core concepts listed here, and some of that might seem obvious, but I think it's mentioned calling them out. Data fetching, just like in Angular, you can use HTTP client. On top of that, you can use the injection functions and all the interceptors. And on top of that, you can also have for service request context, you can use provide server context. And it just kind of streamlines, like no matter what you're using it for a client or your server, there's a way to solve for that. So, okay, for static site generation, like we said, Analog is a great option. All you have to do is define the plugin and set it up and mention the routes, and they will pre-render, which will make your app or website seem so much more faster. I think this is a great way to boost up your Web Vitals score.
Absolutely. And notice here that pre-render takes a routes function and you can configure each route there with a transform. So no matter what you want to do or how you want to tell Angular, I want this to be included this way in my static site that is getting generated. It provides a lot of flexibility where you can write your own custom logic. Like you can transform your own files, and like, you know, if you have some weird format or whatever that you want, that you need to transform into something the web can understand, this provides a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and sometimes it can get confusing. SSG, SSR, but just now, Analog's got you covered no matter what you want to pick. Similarly, you can just define the configuration and have hybrid rendering with client-only routes or you like pre-render routes. All of these weren't really something that were supported out of the box by Angular. Analog has been providing an option to handle that pretty well.
Yeah. This is really cool to me because I was first exposed to these when I was doing a Svelte kit project a couple of years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago. They introduced form actions with this idea of progressive enhancement. So like if somebody can't load JavaScript or JavaScript isn't hydrated for whatever reason, or maybe even JavaScript doesn't work or is slow or something like that, you can use pure HTML to submit forms, and like the framework itself will just help you by providing a way to handle the post request from a form action. Well, Next.js has this feature too. I think they're called server actions in Next.js. Analog supports it also. You can just set up this handler, and then in your form component, it provides an API for you to use the form action to just submit that form, and HTML basically submits that post request for you. And this form action just gives you something on the server for that to hit and handle that functionality. And it, of course, sends a response, and Analog pipes that right back into your on success and on error stuff, so you can display that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's super powerful for sure. Also, something I'm just noticing, I think this is an outdated example because it mentions standalone true, but you don't really need that anymore with new versions. But definitely want to highlight how all the examples are using signals, and I think Analog does a good job of maintaining compatibility with the latest version of Angular and being able to leverage all the features that are now part of Angular. Analog supports the code generation. It works flawlessly with NX generators and Angular schematics. So you can just run either NX generate, or if you want to skip NX CLI, then you can do ng generate, and it will create that repo for you to get things started. And I think that's pretty neat because a lot of people just prefer using NX CLI. So it's helpful to have that integration, not just have to rely on Angular CLI.
Yeah, it is. It's really convenient to use. I will say that the commands for some of these like common generators I use both in NX and with Analog and a lot of other things that I use it for. I tend to alias those to something that I can remember a little easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all have that, but it's helpful to have just like if someone just has that configuration. Sometimes I use the NX plugin in WebStorm. So just having that sometimes also helps.
Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned that we had Analog.js announced in November last year in 2025. I just want to go through some of the new features that we did not have. We kind of saw that we have file system based routing and first class support for Vite ecosystem, and we'll talk about integrations and things like that in a bit. But you can see that content resources are being built on top of the resource API that Angular has introduced recently. And so this is another example of how Analog is just adding on to what Angular already provides to you. And you can just display all the loaded content using that feature and as a signal. So it leverages Angular's new native reactive primitivity adoption. And then we saw a lot of stabilizations and upgrades. I like this chart. It kind of highlights what all you are able to achieve with Analog that you're not able to achieve in Angular in terms of just read test and some other plugins that you can add on to it. I think it's helpful.
Absolutely. I love the way that Analog stands on top of the shoulders of giants in a way. It takes Angular and lets Angular do what it does really well. It doesn't try to hook into it and change how it works fundamentally. It basically just adds new features into Angular. So if you know Angular, you essentially already know Analog. And it's just a matter of coming in here and seeing, okay, Analog handles routing a little bit differently, but if I want to hook into it, I still use the same old Angular guards that I'm used to. And it's just a matter of finding out in Analog how you would configure those. But with stuff like that. It cuts down on a lot of, I hate to say boilerplate, but boilerplate, right? Like a lot of the routing stuff you have to go configure to add a new page, that sort of stuff. If you're using just an Angular project and you kind of know the path that you're adding that component to, you can use the Angular CLI to do that, and it'll automatically do the routing, add the routing stuff for you a lot of times, right? But the problem I've had is I'm 9 nested directories deep from this or that, or I'm putting different things in the lib folder and that sort of stuff. And like, a lot of times typing that command out, figuring out where I need to be and typing that command out and stuff like that to make sure it generates in the right location is more effort than just, right clicking new file and then using a macro to add the component stuff. Anyway, I like how analog makes a lot of that simpler. You just add it to the component tree and then you can navigate to that page. It takes away that kind of extra work. And I think it does that in a lot of ways, especially for content driven sites. But if you still want to use the Angular way to do things, you can.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of it. It's not limiting, it's just enhancing all the ways that she can leverage it. There are actually a lot of people who now have their personal blogs or personal websites written in analog. It's great to see what people have been building with analog and how they're exploring all these ways, whether it's simplistic leveraging just file-based routing for your personal website or leveraging few more of these like the pre-rendering strategies that you can have with it. The analog team is also heavily focused on having tooling support, especially for AI agents. So I know they added an agents.md file to the repo recently and provides better context and instructions for AI agents, and I can vouch for that. I'll share that in a little bit. You'll have to stick around for it, what I was able to accomplish because of that. But it's it's just so great to see all the cool features that you can have with it, and or like the version 2 brought great stabilization in terms of retest and other tooling that it relies on. I know Angular recently announced that they're ditching Jest and they're going to move towards retest, but Analog had already been doing that. So I know a lot of experimentation that the Analog team does and tries to push boundaries of what can be achieved with Angular. The Angular team is definitely listening and feeds on that, all that energy and contributions and feedback, and is able to make just Angular better. And so it's nice to see that they're both feeding off of each other and building more and more features and capabilities on top of each other. And the true winners are all the developers who are able to leverage all of those APIs and the stability in the ecosystem. Okay, I'm gonna share some more things that we have here. Especially integrations like we mentioned NX. It works flawlessly with NX monorepos, and you can also add Tailwind CSS if you choose to in your app through that. But Nitro is a big one because it significantly improves your build time, and I think it's a pretty sweet offering that we have. And of course, yeah, you can add Angular material at any time that you want. And similar, you add Angular CDK and Angular material and just use it like how you would in an Angular app. You set up the theme and everything. Ionic and Storybook are two great integrations that I love how flawlessly they work with analog.
Yeah, that's a big one. Just all of the way most common things that people are using with Angular, like in their Angular ecosystem, often need, mobile apps these days. Ionic is really popular in the Angular world. NX, being able to share those like TypeScript dependencies, service calls, that sort of stuff between these applications, just all the all the benefits you have with Angular playing nice with the ecosystem, analog brings to the table as well. So it's not just great by itself. It's great in the ecosystem.
Yes, absolutely. Another great thing about the integrations that we have here is just to call out Storybook is that, and it kind of is mentioned here too, that Angular and Storybook uses Webpack for build, but with Analog, you are able to switch the build process and leverage Vite instead of Webpack because that's how Analog's the storybook integration works. And I think that's pretty powerful. And I'm waiting for that to be a thing in Angular.
Yeah, I actually didn't know about that part. That's really cool, especially since I wonder what that means for configuration, because Vite configuration and hooking into configuration for Vite is a lot easier than in Webpack. So I think that might open a lot of doors.
Yeah, and I also feel like if the analog team is able to accomplish this, then the Angular team should also be able to and like break that build process to be able to at least have Storybook running on Vite. So that's pretty cool.
That would be great.
Mm-hmm. And like I mentioned, Analog has a lot fewer supporters or contributors than what you would have seen. But I'm sure you'll see a familiar face here. Well, let me find it. Wait, there's so many more people here than I visited this last time. Like, you have to scroll now. There were not that many people contributing to Analog, but I spot our friendly co-host Skylar Johnson, who's also contributed to this framework. So you can tell it's a heavily community-driven meta framework, but obviously would not be where it is without the core team.
I'm excited about this project, and my contribution was very, very tiny. I just, I was coming back from NGConf, I think it was in 2021. And I'd just been talking to Brandon at NGConf about this. I was really hyped up about the framework because he was talking about it there. And on the plane ride back, I ran into an issue while I was trying to start up my own analog project on the plane ride back from the conference, and ran into this issue. And I was like, oh, I'm going to put in a PR for this. I put in a PR on the plane ride back. But that's like, it was a tiny thing. But the heavy lifting that Brandon especially has done with this has been phenomenal. Driving this project the way that he has, and like all the work that he puts into this. And also, he's so active on Discord, like all the questions and stuff like that. I don't know how he does it. He is an MVP of the Angular community, no doubt. And he's been an MVP in the Angular community for a long time. You see a lot of other people that are very, very big into the Angular community here too. Like Brandon historically has worked on all kind of things, from I think Angular itself to NGRX to all kinds of stuff.
And he also, I think he contributed to the Angular router, so it only makes sense that he was able to find a way to achieve file-based routing in Analog. So yeah.
Yeah, and then Robin Goetz, I think is how you say that. But, he's been involved with Spartan NG, which is a full stack kind of a little bit, it's like Analog, but a little bit more opinionated layer on top of Analog that uses some like ShadCN implementation in Angular type components. It wires up some additional stuff like TRPC maybe. I could be wrong about that, but I think it does a little bit of other things like that. And then, of course, you have Chow, which I don't even know how to begin to talk about all the things he does.
Yeah, he probably has 10 clones. I know. We'll link his video when we had him on our channel when we were all hanging out at NGConf last year. We'll link his the video that we recorded with him in the show notes. But he also calls it out here. He's the creator of Angular 3. He's heavily involved in NX, Angular, all things Angular. Is super fun guy to hang out with overall. Yeah, Mark was also NGRX core team member, and he has spent a lot of his time educating the community and improving. I think he's the brains behind Signal Store, NGRX Signal Store also. And Josh Maroney, I think anyone who's ever been involved with Angular is familiar with that name because of his fabulous YouTube videos. I think he, at least from what I am aware of, he's the only person who has a lot of content out there on YouTube on Analog, and I have a feeling that his contributions were similar to yours, that he started using Analog. I know he's also done a video of how he transitioned his Angular course website to Analog JS, and I think like as he was using it, he realized all these new features that he wants to see in this framework or wants to be able to use, and so he just started becoming a core contributor. Yeah, and I think most of the core contributors are also Angular GDEs, and they're super familiar with the framework and have been doing a great job. So yeah, kudos to the team for building and maintaining this framework.
Yeah, it's got a lot of support. A lot of people working on this. A lot of people excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool to see that it's scalable, is still structured well enough that for enterprise apps you can use it. And it's nice to have a meta framework that's at par at multiple levels for this.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can now move on to this section where I wanted to show you this app that I built in Analog. And I say I loosely, it was mostly me prompting anti-gravity to do this for me. It struggled at a few parts. I think it's so easy to tell an app has been built by an agent because of the extensive use of emojis. And it's quite crazy how much agents love emojis. I think that's their love language. But anyways, what I wanted to highlight after a lot of heavy prompting about theming, so that it's not another blur app and things that I wanted to be able to see, the AI agent was able to do it all. In fact, I wanted this feature that when you add something to cart, the checkout form should be fully built on as a Signal form, and everywhere here should only be using Signal APIs, including the Signal form, and it was able to do that flawlessly. And I think that maybe it speaks more about just the state of AI agents in general, but I think the fact that it didn't hesitate, I was half expecting it, honestly, that if I prompted like build an analog JS app, it would build something on Next. Because that's how it used to be. If I initially, when I would prompt AI to build something and say build an Angular app or an Angular component, it would build a React component which would be named Angular or something silly like that. So I was half expecting it to struggle a lot or not be able to build as well, but I think it did a fair amount of job. And I'm pretty sure, because I would see it reference the analog JS documents a lot, I'm pretty sure that half of it is because all the core features are well documented with examples. Granted, they're not enough, but it's well enough for an agent to know what to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but all of the examples that Analog includes on the site probably does help with that.
Especially anti-gravity. I know every model is different and operates differently, but if you tell anti-gravity, use best practices, or I want this feature, if I were to special like use file-based routing of Analog, I could see it open Chrome, like search, do a Google search for it, and read through the examples, and then come back like, okay, now I have a fair understanding what the requirement is, and now I know what to build. And so then it will start building it out. It's super cute, but I think documentation definitely helps. And another thing that I know Brandon specifically has been involved in is building this whole Angular skills. And now we have Angular MCP tool, Angular MCP server that has MCP tools, but skills is an interesting concept because some companies or some people might have restrictions about MCP servers. I know we definitely do around Jira or some other MCP servers in our workspace, but skills are just skills. You just install them, and then your agent is aware of all the things that it should be using. I think initially, way back when, our biggest concern for adoption of any new framework used to be, oh, what's the community support like? How much Stack Overflow communities or answers or unanswered questions are out there? And how much will I struggle if I run into a unique problem? And now our biggest concerns are, how well can an AI agent build upon the framework that you want to just maybe even try or build upon or maintain or things like that. And I think things like these kind of ensure or enforce that AI agents don't really fumble while building upon any of this. And this is more specific to Angular, but it's built. You have to install. The skill is being provided by Analog.js, so you kind of have to add that package. But I think it's a great way to have an AI assistant development workflow integrated into your workflow.
Yeah, it really is. This is another incredible contribution from Brandon, the Angular or the
Yeah.
analog team. I don't know who all contributed to
Yeah.
this particular piece, but this is another just tremendous contribution.
Right. I'm not sure whether it was just Brandon or the team, but because it's associated with analog, I think it's fair to assume there were more than one people behind this. So I think we covered everything that we wanted to share about analog.js with you today. If you're using analog.js in your project or are thinking about it or have questions about it, definitely drop a comment and or tag us, and we would love to hear what your thoughts are about this framework, or where you've seen it shine, or where you struggle with it, or if you've tried using any AI agent to build something on analog. Anything, we would love to hear your thoughts on it. And until next time, see ya.